divided up in thirds.
What did you guys typically do when you got shore leave?
Well, when it's the first time, you was kind of like going to the side care for the very first time. You know, when you get to Hawaii, born and raised here and never had been there before, was quite a fantasy land. So it kept us pretty busy. But we was only there a day.
Yeah. Let's go back to your training. You said the training was about 13 weeks. Was it very intensive training? I mean, was it dangerous?
No, nothing dangerous about it, but it was very intense. They would get us out way early in the morning, and our CO, you know, sometimes I don't know what they're trying to prove, but wasn't every now and then he was in a bad mood and he got us out at 4 o'clock in the morning, just because the underwear was crooked on the wash line outside. I mean, really. And 2 different times, the Marine base is about, what, 10, 15 miles from the Navy base in San Diego?
MCRD.
And one time we went out and I shot what was the M16? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you probably had the M1 Garand.
Well, it was an old gun, so
Yeah.
we shot that for a half a day.
Yeah.
And then one time later, I never will forget because I never seen a gun like that, was the Brownie automatic.
Oh, yeah.
Where it sat on a tripod. We shot that one time, and that was my 100% war training. 100%.
That was it.
When we got into Korea, we was so short-handed. We was down, I bet 30%. I don't know the percentage, but it had to be a bunch. And they called back a lot of reserves from the World War II, and they were tough
What were they
to
like?
get along with. Boy, was they happy.
Really? I bet they were not happy at all.
Oh, they was tough to get along with. So
Yeah.
that's what we went to war with. And none of us, except the ones from World War II, but I mean, the training was nil.
So when you show up in San Diego and you see these huge ships for the first time, what's that like? I mean, you're sitting there, you're going from the Missouri River to the Pacific Ocean, and you're seeing these huge, great. What were you thinking?
Well, it's quite a deal. You think that's bad when you get on the ship, and then they take you in and out of the harbor. You pass thousands of them, and back then there was ships everywhere.
Yeah.
I went to Puget Sound a lot in the state of Washington, and every nick and truck there is full of ships in mothballs, just hundreds and hundreds of them. But none of them was ready to go to war.
So I'm going to ask you 2 letters and 3 numbers, and you tell me the first thing that pops into your head when I say this. DD 887. What's the first thing that pops into your mind?
Brinkley Bass, my ship.
Brinkley Bass. That's right. And what kind of a ship was the Brinkley Bass?
A destroyer. A full-size destroyer. There's several sizes of destroyers.
Do you remember the call sign of the Brinkley Bass?
No.
Did they call it the Doughboy?
The boss of the Wonsan Harbor is what we used to refer to it all the time. You'll see it in my literature, actually.
That's right. That's somebody used to call it the Doughboy, and that
well,
may have
there's
been
a
before.
song, The Doughboy, so they did sing that.
Maybe that's what it was. So when you got aboard her the first time, what was that like, being on board such a huge ship?
It's very difficult to explain because it's something I've never ever seen before and had no idea the tightness of it. The passageways are lucky to be 30 inches wide, and the stairs, which we call the ladders on a ship, was straight up and down. And once you're on there, just a little while, you put your feet on the 2 railings and your hands like that. I could go down 3 decks.
So it was like in the movies. That was really the way it was.
I could go down in 10 seconds. Just
Getting back up though is a different story.
Never used the steps.
Now, how long did it take you to feel at home in your quarters and also in your workstation?
It takes more than just a little bit. And at first, we didn't stay on it. We stayed in the barracks because it was so tore up. But it wasn't very long we did. But you're young, you get used to it pretty quick. But they're in the aft where we was, the engineering division, their bunks. The first on the floor is the locker for all 3, and then there's a bunk right above them, then one in the center and one there. And if you put your elbow like this on the bunk and you went like that, you was rubbing the guy above you. Very tight.
So what did you do if somebody snored?
You get used to that.
Now, did you kind of hot bunk? Were there shifts coming in and out, or were you pretty much assigned to your bunk? That was your bunk.
No, seniority is how you got the good bunks.
Mm.
Nobody wanted the bottom one because the guy always wanted to
Step
get
on.
in the locker,
Yeah.
so he was going to disturb you. The center one is carried all the weight. Everybody liked the center bunk, but you didn't get that for a while.
Yeah.
You had to earn that.
Could you sleep in there? I mean, did you have
Oh, yeah.
claustrophobia? The
In
sound?
fact, it's so bad that the bunks are hung by chains, so you can fold them up if you had to. But you grab the post over here that the chain is tied to, and your hand on the chain over here, and your feet is against the chain down there, and the bunk over there, and the ship can go like that. And it takes a while naturally, but once you do, it's the same thing with eating. When we would eat, and a while ago, that film you seen there,
Right.
our food is in a metal tray, and it's got pockets in it, and everything is homemade on the ship. But when you eat under that condition, the ship goes that way, you roll this up there, and when it goes this way, you roll it up this way, go this way.
So
You're
you're
always
eat-
eating with your
So you said your hand turned into a gimbal mount. It
always just back and forth.
that's pretty amazing. How was the food on board the ship?
You know what? Considering back then, naturally you complained about it all the time, but really, now that you think about it, when we have a reunion, which we do all the time, on Saturday morning they make sure that the hotel we're in is prepared, and they make the big bean breakfast that we used to have in the Navy. So it's still very good. Actually, the food was good. We had homemade bread every day.
Did the guys get along pretty well with each other? I mean, did you
Yes.
ever have any conflicts?
Oh yeah, if you did,
How'd you solve that?
Well, discipline was a must. You had to get along because it was right there, and if they felt you had to be transferred, they would, but not lightly, because then they're getting the guy that got transferred got the upper hand. It's the same thing with seasickness. There's a few people that maybe didn't like what they were doing, so they was acting like they were seasick all the time. You almost had to die from seasickness before they'd take you off of there.
Wow. Now, the Brinkley Bass, can you tell me about how the ship came by that name, the Brinkley Bass?
There was a pilot in World War II and was in the invasion of France. And he got shot down. And today, believe it or not, there's a great big memorial built over there by the French government for him. His name was Brinkley Bass. And every year, some of his relation comes to our reunion. And we have one every year.
Do you remember where the hull was laid down for the ship, where it was built?
Orange, Texas.
That's right, it was. It was built in Texas.
And my memory ain't very good.
That's pretty good. I have to say, I'm impressed. So, when you guys cast off for the first time from San Diego and you're headed out, haze gray underway, is it like in the movies? Is everybody on the bow and the stern of the and midsection of the ship, and they're all waving and they're in their whites?
No, that's when you're coming in. When you're going
Okay.
out, you got a thing. You got something to do. If you're just sailing and not in the war or whatever, then there's plenty of time to go topside. But that gets, you do that not that often. You always got something you're doing.
When you went topside, what would you do? I mean, was there any recreation at all on board the ship? Did you guys?
No, very little. Played cards. They would shoot crap, as they call it.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff.
How about
Typical.
how about mail call? Did you guys have mail call on the ship?
Yeah, we had mail call on.
How often did that happen?
Pretty regular. Well, it depends on the situation. There was no regular. When you was during the war, it was however they could get it over. The letter might be 3 weeks old by the time you get it. But I tell you what, they worked hard at that. They really made sure that stuff kept flowing.
So that was
We had to
pretty,
take on fuel anyway, so let it follow the supply.
bring the bag over.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty big deal. Did you like it when you got letters from home?
Well,
Make you feel pretty good?
you felt good for you if you didn't even know the guy and you got a letter. I mean, it's just anything to break monotony. I spent the first 2 Christmases I was in the Navy, I was in Korea. I got pictures I could show you where the ship's guns were that big instead of that big. And the rope safety line around the ship from being a 5/8 was over 3 inches from ice, that
Oh
cold.
my!
Oh, and Korea was a cold sucker.
Who wrote you primarily? When
Well,
you got
my
it?
mom is naturally the mother's,
Yeah.
you know.
And so I'm sure you were a good sailor and you wrote your mom.
I did. I didn't ride as often as she did, but you do because you want to try to clear your mind, even though you're young and brave. You know, it's like when the war. I remember the first time we was in combat. You don't get topside very much because that general quarters, and that's what it's called. When they blow the thing, you better know. Everybody is assigned somewhere. I don't care who you are. You got a position to go. So you don't get the topside very much during that situation.
My boy asked me to ask you a question, and he wants to know about the guns. He wanted to know how many big guns you had on board and what were they?
Well, the 5-inch guns we had 2, 4, 6.
6 5-inch.
40 millimeter we had 2, 4, 6, 8.
That's very good.
2 sets of those.
Do you remember roughly how much the ship weighed? What tonnage it was?
No, I don't. I did.
And
It's very common because we always would talk about tonnage. But right now I can't tell you.
If the source that I saw was good, is 2.4 or 2.4, no, 2,400 tons. Does that sound right?
That's 2,000.
Okay. About 390 feet long. It was a long ship, 40 feet wide. And she was, what, 35 knot ship? Doesn't that sound about right? That's moving.
I tell you what, them aircraft carriers get up there and run that fast too.
Were they? Could they leave you behind?
Oh no, they wouldn't run away from us.
That probably wouldn't be too smart.
No, that's right. We're the ones who protected them. If it's really in a heavy zone, there'd be 3 destroyers on each side.
How many men did you have on board?
360 was considered war complement.
That must have
Once
been
in a while we had
in.
a few. Oh yeah, I guarantee you.
So what was life like on board the ship? I mean, just kind of give us an idea of your duties. You know, how often you're able to eat, rest. I mean, we kind of talked about this to some extent already, but you know, just for people that want to know what a daily routine, let's say a combat routine. If you're on combat patrol, what would that 24-hour cycle be like?
Actually, when we was in Wonsan Harbor, and I always refer to that because that's actually Wonsan Harbor. It was the city of Wonsan right there. That was enemy territory, and our job in Wonsan Harbor, even if they wasn't shooting at us, it was a restricted war. We was only allowed to shoot 5 of the big guns an hour, and that was just to keep the road open, the main road open at all times, back and forth to the front line.
Well, why did they restrict the amount that you could shoot? That's
the way that whole war was. We could have went in there and won the war. We didn't want to do that. We didn't want to start a third world war. It was to stop communism from spreading, and that's nobody knew at the time, including all the people fighting there. I didn't know what we were doing there except fighting the North Koreans. But after it's all over, many years, we stopped communism from spreading over the world. That was the end of it.
And the ship's captain at the time, during your first rotation, what was he like? Do you remember his name?
You'd hardly ever seen him. Bars was one of them, and we had a bunch in my 4-year time because they move around. It's just their duty. We were flagship at least 75% of the time.
And what does that mean, flagship?
Okay, that the head supreme of that group of destroyers that makes up this complement, he's over that.
So the task force
commander, 54 or 52 it was, 52. Task force, that's where he would be on our ship.